We're going to start at Chartreuse de Chaumont. A Chartreuse is a charter house or Carthusian monastery. The Carthusians did not work but lived a life of prayer, relying on the duke or the community to support them. Therefore, the duke set up a significant endowment for the construction and development of the monastery at Chaumont. And this is a massive monastery, a massive undertaking. Of course, one of the reasons that you pay for a monastery is that all of those monks can pray for your immortal soul, hopefully shortening your time in purgatory. This is really common amongst Northern European rulers. And we start with Klaus Slaughter. Now, we don't really know much about him, but he does create the Well of Moses. This is a large sculptural fountain, although the fountain probably never ran due to the strict commitment to silence within the order. Here, Moses and 5 prophets surround a base that once supported a 25-foot crucifixion, and so the original would have been much larger. The blood of Christ, in the form of water, was to symbolically spill over the prophets, washing over his symbolic predecessors. The sculptures themselves each have individual characteristics, separating them from each other and leading to their identification. For example, the man with horns is Moses, and we know that. You can identify these people based on specific characteristics. That's key because otherwise you can't really identify the saints. There aren't facial features or things like that that tend to identify them. Here, the drapery, the clothing, does not enhance the form, but is intended to cover it. We're back to that point where the figures are not being highlighted by the clothing. So remember, I did this drawing in the past. My little stick figure, here's his legs and arms. And then, of course, when you were younger, you would have drawn a t-shirt like this on them, which has absolutely no relation to their body whatsoever, but it looks an awful lot like a t-shirt. That's what Klaus Slaughter is doing here. So when you look at it, you don't get the impression of an arm running back here. In fact, this hand is sort of oddly placed. You don't get a sense of a body underneath so much as maybe a rectangle that runs about here. Now, this doesn't mean that the Northern Europeans are not as good as the Italians. This means that Klaus Slaughter is not doing the same thing that we see from Donatello or Michelangelo later on. These figures were also originally painted, and we see some of that paint left on the figures. This is really, really common. In fact, in the Renaissance, that's really, in Italy, is when they stopped painting sculpture. All throughout ancient history, the Greeks, the Romans, everyone else painted it. And even the Gothic cathedrals, the Romanesque cathedrals, were all painted. The reason they stop is ultimately they find these white sculptures from the Greeks where the paint has already come off, and they decide that that's a better look, more aesthetically pleasing, and so they will stop. But here in Northern Europe, they're continuing on with the tradition of these painted forms. They were meant to look as realistic as possible, as if the prophet was actually standing there before you, and it makes for a really impressive piece.